But what are some of the allegations that have gone thus far? Has been who funded who, which criminal element was part of, so which contracts did you give to which criminal group, etc. And this cannot continue to happen. Because if that is the case, is this why we are seeing the problems that we have today? But having said that, it's important for us to understand that when the COP came into being, that we have been practicing. We have gone astray, yes, over the last couple of years. We are supposed to have audited financial accounts, which are supposed to be revealed, and we have been doing so up to a couple of years ago. I would say over the last 2 to 3 years, we lapsed in this, and which is why we are trying to put back into the systems in place where we go to our National Assembly, we present audited accounts, we declare our sources of funds, we declare our expenditure in accordance with being transparent and open. And if you look at the way we fund, and I think the important issue here, there are two aspects of this: how you fund a campaign and how you fund a political party. Because this issue with the $50,000, we get away with that issue because the party takes over. And the party brings in their financials. So even though your campaign as a candidate may be more than $50,000, the party takes care of the rest. So in that situation now, and I made the point the other day, when we come to this issue of members of parliament representing their constituencies, do you? In the case of the government, you toe a cabinet line. In the case of the opposition, you toe a party line because you have to accede to what the financiers would have said for that particular party. So if we are going to break that, and this is why in the COP we have started saying we are not into big financing. We are looking at, and all our internal campaigns, you would have recalled, internal elections. Tim would recall this in internal elections. We are not allowed to have publicity on the television, no public ads in the media. What we encourage are public debates.
Maybe that's the COP.
Because that's the model that we want for campaigning. That's the model we want for all political parties. That's the model we want for Trinidad and Tobago. Is it necessary? Because you raise the issue about financing. I think it's an important issue, and I don't know if you get a chance to come back to it. What type of funding are we talking about? Because there are mixed. You could be talking about what the literature will speak to, grassroots funding, right? That is linking with the individual, which is what we have done. On Sunday, we launched our new website. And on that website, you will see that we are being transparent in terms of you can go on, you can submit your $20, your $30, because it's part of, making sure that we link back with the average citizen. That's what we want, instead of the few interest, what we call interest money.
So you don't encourage funding from major
we never
corporations,
did.
major
Never
contractors.
did.
As
there are limits to that.
Yeah.
There are limits to that.
Alexander, so you sort of looked at, in kind of with horror at some of what Mr.
Both of them. I completely disagree with both of them.
Go ahead.
And you know that I will. Because I disagree completely with Timothy Hammersmith's position that there should be anything less than full transparency. And every donation made to any political party, especially big numbers, should be published. I disagree with what Carolyn Sipasat Bechan just said about that the $50,000 is for the candidate and the party could take over. My understanding is the intention was the $50,000 was the budget that was allowed nationally 41 times by $50,000. When Stuart Young rented the building on the corner of wherever that street is in Belmont and wrap that building, the wrapping cost $150,000, the building cost $55,000. Both of those were breaking laws, and I wrote to the EBC and they ignored it. Our problem in Trinidad and Tobago at every level and every point and every situation is enforcement. What you need to do is say that if you spend $1 more than the $50,000 or whatever we agree to, but the $50,000 is adequate. We are drowning the national campaigns in nonsense money so they could do crazy ads.
Well,
I just want to say this one thing to you, and the enforcement that we need and the amendment that we need is at the level of the campaign. If your campaign, me as candidate, if my campaign spend $1 more than what I am allowed, disqualify me. That is where it will hurt political parties the most, and they will be driven to protect.
There's some responses to that, but one of the persons I had who was on the session before me this morning suggested that if we were to observe the law as it exists now, Rishi Maharaj, we wouldn't necessarily have to talk about campaign finance reform because there are laws now.
Well, I mean,
and the
law, and to piggyback, I guess what Mr. Alexander just said, the laws allow for $50,000 per candidate. Well, obviously, the question becomes, it doesn't talk about the third party, people comes from on the outside and do things for you. I mean, I've seen political parties, campaigns where the candidate is ready to launch his campaign and somebody say, well, I'll donate 20 mics well, I'll donate, so much shares and tent, and I'll set this up. But obviously, what cause that comes up afterwards, after you get power, and that's where they come back and say, well, I donated X and Y to your campaign. I expect to get my investment returns. So it's about, $50,000. It's about understanding exactly what we mean by political campaigning and what exactly, because we're now moved to a send of cyber. And I think it now comes down to using the internet, social media, telephone. So maybe 50,000 could be enough. But the fact is, nobody's able to actually ascertain what is the cost for election campaign for an election, because nobody throws out the proper numbers.
Yeah.
We have election body, the parties, for example, that are signed to this code of conduct. And part of the code of conduct was at the end of the campaign, you were supposed to submit audit reports to the afterwards. That was set up by the Archbishop some time ago, but nobody's ever set it up.
And I'm not sure how central this is to the discussion, but it is important in a sense if we're talking about campaigning, because in the beginning of the year, the Prime Minister came to the nation and said, I want to address the nation on some issues. And it was an address that was carried, it was recorded before and carried on as many television stations who would have carried it. They used the rubric of government time to do that. And then a week later, the chairman of the party, the Minister of Finance, said that was the beginning of our campaign. Isn't something wrong with that?
I certainly think so. And that's why you do need, it would be naive for anybody to suggest that the legislation we have is satisfactory or sufficient.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with the 50,000. If you limited a candidate 50,000, doesn't mean we limit the party.
That's
So
right.
we haven't limited, doesn't limit party action groups. There are so many flaws in that legislation that it is just unworkable. We need new legislation. Whatever limit we put to it, can be negotiated. Whether it was 50,000, 100,000, it doesn't matter. We need laws. We need laws governing political action groups. We need laws governing political parties. There is no law governing political parties. There is a law regarding candidates. So that's why we could get away with nonsense, is the truth. And everybody concedes that we need political financing legislation. It's the form, shape, and method in which we do that is really the question at heart. And if we just remain with the existing legislation, we'll continue to be the laughing stock. This is not just a matter for the voters, The fact is, internationally, you lose respect when in fact you have no funding requirements, no legal requirements surrounding these issues. So in fact, the fact that you need to have a stable government, but a stable government has to be
at what the party is doing. When the party comes in with the millions after and takes over the campaign, is that illegal? It is not. And that is why we need the laws to start regulating party financing, not just the candidate. So just to endorse what Timothy is saying. But part of that is in terms of going towards campaign finance reform. And I think it's important that we understand it's a reform. I heard some people saying, no, it's not. It's because what are we doing with money in campaigns? What are we doing with money in politics? It has to go hand in hand with the type of behavior that we are trying to encourage in politics. And therefore, is it the, of a campaign, you have to run an office, you have to have administrative staff, so we have to know how that is being funded. So it's very, very important when we come in to deal with legislation that we include in there what are the behaviors we are looking for politically.
Yeah, when you say we can't get rid of it, we can't get rid of parties being funded.
No,
because
you
there are
can't.
legitimate reasons why
Yeah,
parties
if you
will
go
be
to that
funded.
point, then you're saying political parties should not exist because they have to be funded.
From somewhere.
Andy, I don't understand the format of the interview and how much time is allotted to contributors, so I just want to make sure I get back my initial minutes. And I want to agree with Rishi, what Rishi said, and then that dovetails to agreeing with Timothy, and finally I agree with something Carolyn said. But the truth of the matter is, and it remains this, that we could keep it simple. We don't. The best don't have to be the enemy of the good. We've been voting on this planet for centuries. We could find what works and keep it simple. If we say
we have to agree on what works first.
absolutely, and I agree with that.
That's right.
So we all agree that what exists now is not working. So we want to get to something that can work. But can we not keep that simple? I have observed and I've said that when you have a campaign where every ad that is played or published must be officially endorsed by the candidate, that I approve this message, that any other ad published,
here?
no, I'm
You don't know what
saying,
abroad.
I'm saying, any other ad published or broadcasted is not my responsibility. And it becomes a responsibility of the radio station or the TV station or the newspaper to not accept ads that are not endorsed by the candidate. So no big deep pocket financer could come outside and drown the campaign in money to say that they supported you. When Rishi raised the issue about speakers and microphones and places to have your event, all of those things could have a value arbitrarily assigned. So if you can't disclose how much you paid for the speakers still have a value. A speaker car is $400 for 2 hours in Trinidad and Tobago right now, give or take. So if you've had 15 speaker cars, and we, the Progressive Empowerment Party, we're going to monitor everybody. So when we see what you put in as these were your costs for your campaign, we're going to ask you, but what about this? Because it is time, but I want to come back to the last.
Monitoring because you are going to hold
We have
yourselves up to
us and everybody else. Because if you are setting a standard and you say that this is how it's going to operate, then it must be enforced. In the last election in Barataria and Belmont, PNM operatives and UNC operatives had election banners within the stipulated distance from a polling station. And we raised that issue with the police, we raised that issue with the EBC, and they sent operatives to take it down. That's not the rule. If you violate the rule, disqualify your candidate. I want to say this again. The most important thing in an election is the candidate winning. The candidate must have a vested interest in making sure that his candidacy and his campaign is not brought into question. He must be invested in that. We cannot continue to have a situation where everybody could say, not me, he, not he, she. We need to say that the buck stops with the candidate. If I am running for election in Diego Martin West, I am responsible for everything done in my name and every dollar spent.
All right, what does that settle on this issue about disclosure?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about understanding the semantics of a campaign, but also the semantics of a political party. As was said, there is no legislation right now that defines what political parties in Trinidad and Tobago. The EBC's only job is to register your symbol, and that's all they do. So we need to understand exactly what do you mean by a political party, because political parties only have a fundamental importance in any democratic society. But then it also talks about giving other smaller parties a chance to be able to compete with the big parties, because when it comes to that, that's where the financing really hits the home, because many smaller parties can't compete with the monies, and they can't compete with the airtime on media. So there are different formulas, there are different
and those things really matter. I mean, how much media time a party gets or something.
Yeah.
Well, it's about getting your message
If
out
that
into the
matters.
population. I mean, for example, in some countries' jurisdiction, I think in Nordic countries and in Western Europe, for example, during election campaign, some of them actually abolish, you can't campaign in the media. No, I think Germany, for example, does that.
That would be
So
a fantastic
you
move.
can't campaign in the media.
And that's the point
you
I
know?
was making.
Another
Yeah.
example, figure right now, India is going through the election process. They've started the election process campaign. And I just read in the online yesterday or the day before that when I looked at the code of conduct, the government is not allowed to cut any ribbon or to announce any new policies or initiatives or even to award any contract during that period. The example where I think they was looking to award contracts for 90 airports in India. And they said that all the process has gone through everything. they're not going to award the contract until after the election, because that's part of the rules of conduct. So it's about understanding exactly how political campaign spans out before election bell is rung and during election bell, and what things you can put in place to allow for other smaller parties to get a chance to get their names out there, to get their voices out.
So what causes parties to lose, parties in government to lose, as we've seen, we have the experience in Trinidad and Tobago 5 times in the last 30 years, with all the resources at their disposal. The People's Partnership had 29 seats in the parliament between 2010 and 2015 and lost miserably with all the resources at its disposal.
My dad would say we vote all parties and we don't vote.
Well, right.
But
So
money doesn't.
We vote out the incumbent. So money doesn't.
That's my point.
Yeah, money doesn't sell it, but money gives certain people the power to be able to get their message out.
And therefore, frankly, we are spending wasted. Trinidad and
That's
Tobago
right.
is spending huge amounts of money to produce nothing.
For 1.4
So, but
million
what you
people.
do simply is you put a cap on how much you're allowed to spend, and yes, you have to report all your expenses, including those in kind, on an arm's length commercial basis. But if you were to take Philip's point to its logical conclusion, he would outlaw political parties.
But that's what Carlos was
They're
saying.
outlawed now. They're outlawed
No,
now.
they're not outlawed.
Timothy, the Constitution
They
only
just,
recognizes political parties
Yeah,
one
that doesn't
time
make them
only.
outlawed.
They're not
No,
outlaws.
So they're in law?
Yes.
So they're in a gray area of law.
No, they're
How do you register a political party?
You don't register it. You do have to get your logo
Yeah.
approved.
But the Constitution doesn't speak to political parties
Doesn't make you
anyway.
an outlaw. I didn't see your name inside the Constitution.
But
you
I'm-
must be an outlaw.
We-
What can I
but-
tell you?
but we all
That's
are.
absurdity. Our names, the Constitution doesn't deal with every facet of life. Political parties are not illegal entities.
Timothy,
Yeah.
to say that
They're
is
not
to be
illegal.
disingenuous
No,
because,
but if
because
they're
the
outlawed, it means they
Constitution,
can't exist.
yeah, but the
And
Constitution
they
speaks to the
they're not
establishment of
allowed
the
to
House of
exist.
Representatives
Yeah.
and the Senate and the President and the Parliament and the
But
Prime
his
Minister.
point, strictly speaking,
I'm
is
saying
yeah.
to you, if the
If you
only
use a
time the
wrong term.
Constitution recognizes a political party is an asterisk when it tells you how it could fire a member of Parliament, it tells you that it wants to deal
So
with
you
it.
have an illegal entity that you're running and operating, is what you're saying?
I can't because I'm not a political party. We can't
Or you
register.
don't have a political party. I mean, but it's,
There's no law.
Timothy, if you want to go that route, we can engage.
no,
I want
come
to
on,
say, you
come on.
raised the point just now. Why
And
did
let me come to currency, but that's first, and then you come
The
back.
political parties are recognized lawfully in this country, as in other jurisdictions which we inherited the law from in our own constitution. So let's go beyond that point. They
Which
are
law is
lawful,
that?
Right? At the bottom line of it, however, because they register their symbols, they send up their candidates, and their candidates are represented under that symbol. So let's go beyond that.
But
point,
how is that
because we have to be
lawful?
practical. We have to be practical. Because are we going to make them unlawful? I think not. We also have to understand the importance of political parties in developing a healthy democracy. Political parties bring about an ideology. So we can't argue against the formation of political parties. So let's move beyond that. I think what is important is how we manage political party and their funding. You know, Rishi raised some issues about India. We have made this point over and over. You would recall when Indira Gandhi herself was jailed for using state resources during a campaign. All right, that is not allowed. My view is, and I just want to make some quick recommendations in terms of how we move forward with this financing issue. Because if we don't, we're going to continue to influence governance and we're going to import. In fact, this because of political financing, the financing of parties, I believe that we have an inequitable distribution of wealth in our country today. Because our parties today, and I would say this, COP made that mistake as well, coming down to the end of its tenure in 2014, 2015, when it started, and 2016, when it started depending on a lot of bigger financing instead of the average citizen. So that is how you disconnect from the support from the average citizen who supports your ideology. The second issue is, do we need all this funding that goes on? This is why in our own internal rules for our internal elections, there's no need for all this amount of big ads, as Timothy said. There's a lot of non-productive money. So when somebody says that the last campaign, so the estimate was $300 million was spent, does someone recognize that was taxpayers' money that was spent? Because that has to be returned. That has to go back out in some way, some form of fashion, and it will go back out in low value for money in terms of contracts. It will go back out in terms of in-kind contributions. So the bottom line is the taxpayer paid that $300 million.
It
And what-
has to, or that is how the
It's
system works.
ineffective. inevitably, the taxpayer paid that. The taxpayer funds paid this 300 million.
What Carolyn is saying is that, of course, it's really an investment
It's the quid pro
in an
quo.
election. So you get a contract, and the contract, the Trinidad and Tobago loses value because the contract price is enhanced, but we only get a certain amount
So
of
it's
value. And the
contractors.
difference is the
that's what I'm
taxpayers
saying.
who
So
put
it's
up the money.
contractors who finance big time.
But Andy,
Because
you
Trump
know there is
has
a contract mafia that has run
I know.
the
But
People's
300
Partnership Government
I don't
and
know
the
that.
PNM. The Congress of the
300
People is well aware of that. They benefited
No,
from it
we did not benefit
between
from that.
2010 and 2015,
Well,
and I could
Philip-
cite points and People's Partnership members who were well in bed with them, but that is not the purpose of this interview. When you speak to
We'll
the
take
issue
it
of
up on another.
campaign at any
Yeah.
time, campaign finance reform, that was the purpose of what I was invited to talk about.
Let's
The
deal with that.
Constitution speaks to the setup of government. It never mentions how a political party gets there. When I say that no law recognizes it now, that is a fact. We could call it lawful by some
Well, it
magic.
is. I mean, so the point of that is
We
not-
are political parties. We could
Yes.
call ourselves political orgies. It doesn't make a
No,
difference.
but-
We don't exist. We don't exist by
I'm
law.
trying to understand your point.
You
Is that-
cannot go to
yeah.
the Ministry of Legal Affairs today and register a political party, and until you can,
But it doesn't stop the
existence,
existence
it
of and
doesn't
the
mean-
acceptance.
you can't write a
of-
check to the
you
People's
can't-
National Movement. You can't write a check to the Congress of the People. They have to form a non-profit company.
Not at all.
So how do you get your money?
Right? We have a COP account, and we always have
A COP account trading as Congress of the People. Who's the
Congress
person's
of
name?
the People.
What is the
It is
name?
established. Congress of the People
What
is the name
type
of the
of
account.
business?
And we have had it. No business.
So
It is
your
under the
bank
political
is
bank.
receiving
That's
money as the
right,
Congress of
as
the
the
People,
Congress of the
with you
People.
not being a limited liability
That is-
or a non-profit. Because I would like to come and deal with that bank.
Right?
Because I'm dealing again,
Go ahead.
Timothy Hammersmith
Are
and
you
Caroline
aware-
Sipperson.
are you aware of
Listen,
partnerships?
I know I live. I know I
operate a
live in.
partnership
I
and
know
I
I,
want 5 accounts.
Good, but I know I live in a lawless society. If you're having this conversation about us getting to a place where we could
Talking
deal with
about
political.
reforming the law that addresses the spending in
Yes,
elections
Andy,
and so on.
but we
We're
just
taking for
we just
granted-
said we just said
taking as
we
a
just
fact.
said that there is a law and then there's an end run. When Rishi, I keep agreeing with Rishi. When Rishi spoke about India, I want to remind everybody here about this. When Arnold Schwarzenegger was running for governor of California, all of the media houses got a letter telling them, if you run a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger in the next 6 weeks, you will give all of his opponents equal time.
So what
And
we're
need
talking
a-
about, what we're talking about
And
is
so
whether
we
or not
need
we move.
legislation to
Yes,
deal
Yes,
what
we
I'm saying.
absolutely
Well,
do.
precisely,
I thought
and that's
we
what we're
did-
talking
No,
about.
No, I never said that.
that's what we're talking about.
I said that the 50,000 cap, I had a meeting with the chairman of the Elections Boundaries Commission before the 2015 election, and he said that they've already written all of these recommendations and they're waiting for it to pass by
Well,
Parliament.
exactly. Let's move on.
Okay, but before you get to moving on, Andy, I want to ask you a question. The Constitution that speaks to the setup and how the government and the Parliament is formed only recognizes individuals. As far as the Parliament
That's a different issue,
concerned,
Philip. That's a different issue. We go
We'll
on
come
deep-
another
so-
day to talk about whether you have a political party or not.
about that. So let's talk about what. So come back on the issue.
Can I finish what I was? I start. To get a chance. So what I was saying is that if you look at what has happened in terms of financing, there in the reform, you have had many jurisdictions that have also looked at public subsidies, okay, public funding, and what you do now is you force a certain type of behavior with that. So, for example, government may say, and I want to say, government independent of the political party will say, okay, a certain amount of time on the government broadcasting stations that used to happen,
Yeah.
and you give equal airtime to all of the
Agreed.
political parties, but it must be for a purpose. So you force a particular behavior. Said anyhow, when you get there, you could disqualify yourself based on what you're saying. If you go down the line of offensive language, racial slurs, gender, against offensive against women and so on, you can be disqualified from having access to that. So that's what I'm saying is that when we come to the financing must be aligned to the behavior we are looking for, the ethical
Caroline,
behavior in
that's
politics.
nonsense.
Wait a
Wait a
second.
second.
Philip.
how-
Philip,
wait a
let me
second,
finish.
wait a second.
But she's had two chances to
second,
speak.
wait a
Mine was
second.
only an
You cut me
interruption.
off. You cut
Mine
me
was
off.
only an interruption. You
Wait a
went from Carolyn to
second.
Timothy and
But
back.
I
Wait a
let me
second,
finish.
wait a second.
Let me
All right,
finish
well then
my
different
point. And this,
interview.
I pack up and go.
right, the second issue.
If it's a COP interview, I can leave and
Well,
come back
you
for a
feel
PEP
do that.
interview.
I mean, frankly speaking, you're free to do that.
Finish, Carolyn. Let me see if I get my time.
Right? The point I'm making is that if we are going to use the public funding, I mean, force a particular behavior, because someone mentioned the point, what's the purpose of all these trucks and all of that, music trucks, which create a lot of noise? And what about if you encourage more public debates, which was what we have been encouraging? And this is why our own code of ethics in the party requires us in our internal elections to carry on political campaigns in a particular way. Right, in a particular way. And therefore, we are not allowed to put up campaigns. We can't put up public ads. We cannot put up TV ads. We must encourage the party will pay for public debates in terms of going forward. And that's why the party comes out. So the same way we are saying, the country needs to come forward. If you're going to combine it, there can be that mix with some public funding. They can be mixed with what we call the average citizen, which you don't have to declare once it's below a particular level, $20, $25, $100, whatever. The limits again being determined based on when we look at how we want to structure our politics in Trinidad and Tobago. And thirdly, when it comes to interest funding, because I want to make a point. We're going out there and we're calling the businessman who funds a political party and we're looking at it evil. But there are businesses outside there that fund for the right reasons. They come forward to say, look, listen, we would hope that a party could get into government who at the end of the day will ensure that there's fairness in terms of how we do contracts, that there's equity, there's social justice. And they come forward and they do that.
And they don't
that's
seek
fine.
no kickbacks.
No,
or anything
they
for
don't.
that.
But they should be declared so that it can be monitored properly. My last suggestion is there is a need for a public agency, and I don't think it's the EBC that can do it. There's a need for an independent public agency that can monitor all the financing of political parties in terms of their audited statements, the income they receive, expenditure, how the expenses are paid, and the candidates' financing at the end of the day and during the campaign trail.
Plenty overnight conversions between Saul and Paul on the way to Damascus. All of us, all of a sudden, people who have had government, who have had the air of prime ministers, who have had access to cabinet, all of these fancy ideas now, when you had 5 years and 6 months, you
For
did
the
nothing.
record, I did. I
Carolyn,
did put that in a
Sipasat Bichan,
proposal.
I
and
can't
it's
interrupt
there.
you, so you can't
And
interrupt
there-
me. Let me
and
just
there
finish.
is- There
Let
is
me-
legislation that we had proposed.
Mr. Speaker,
But the point
Mr.
is that,
Speaker, I would like my
in
time.
some cases, the room within
$15
the day-
million the UNC is negotiating with one radio station right now for airtime. $15 million at one radio station. It has gotten ridiculous
This
and
one?
out. I'm not in a position to say. But it's got ridiculous and out of control. And again, if we come back down to the $50,000 spend, because I want to stick to that $50,000, you would limit the conversation to interaction between the candidate and the voter. We don't have to over-legislate everything. Carolyn talking about content. Leave that for the ethical committee. Let us talk about spend. Put a cap on that. Put a cap on your spend. So no massive finance company could come. All of this nonsense about what they expect in return, the taxpayer to pay for it. Forget all of that. If you have a $50,000 spend or $100,000 spend in your campaign for 6 weeks, you have to find a way to creatively use that. And that $100,000, you could make that in barbecue and washing cars. I could tell you, because the PEP is the most transparent political party in this country, and all our funding is made that way through fundraising with our supporters, members, and the public.
And then you wouldn't concede that what you just said there is a campaign plug for your party. That is the most
Not at all. I've been sitting down here in a meeting where I'm hearing the history of the Congress of the people, and I was there for a lot of it, and I didn't see none of that take place. The truth of the matter is, Andy, we've made this thing a lot more difficult than it needs to be. And I'm still going to say, even if you're not going to address it, if you're going to campaign, finance, legislate political parties should be legal entities first.
Right, so you will write that into the proposal.
I think it should start there. Timothy would agree.
No, but that's absolutely true.
Good,
Nobody's
yes.
part of campaign financing requires that you
So to
register
the
political
entity.
parties. So I have no
That's
problem
why
with
Absolutely
that.
But we're
start there.
advocating for
When
that.
you look, for instance, you should have there are, as Carolyn mentioned, companies that feel that democracy demands, the only way you have democracy is through political parties. My friend would like to say candidates. And therefore, it is an important function. You either want democracy or you don't. So therefore, political parties are important to that. And corporate people say, we want to support that. That if you had a national campaign fund, where they're not supporting any specific political party, I am willing to contribute to a national campaign fund, and that will be divided among the political parties. And more than that, what do they do with the money? Frankly, going beyond campaign financing, and one of the things that's holding back Trinidad and Tobago is, of course, we think of campaigns, and we have an election machinery, and we set up a manifesto and put some nice pictures, and we talk about things we never do, a bridge to nowhere, or wherever it is, and we put them in this manifesto. What we really need is for each political party to have a policy consultant, if you like, right? A paid whole-time policy person who develops policy for the party. Then you can get a strategic difference in how Trinidad and Tobago is managed. Now you're getting some reward,
Tim, you're straight.
For this
You're straight.
campaign money that you want to
You're
put up.
straight in how the parties
And
operate. You're
therefore,
straight.
You need this, to my mind, this campaign fund could be dedicated, and we will allocate you money to allow you to engage the services of a full-time policy consultant, so that when we come to the election time, we have something real meaty to bring to the population, and I could really start looking at policy instead of voting on tribe or politics or whatever it might be.
All right, on that note, we pause for a pause. Stay with us. We'll be coming back on the other side of this discussion, campaign finance reform. This is In Focus here on Power 102 FM this Wednesday. So
This going on till what time?
Huh?
What time this going on? 2?
Yeah,
This panel?
This segment, yeah.
I have to
But
leave
you
at
have to get you
4:30.
to, yeah. So I think some goes
And,
toward 1:30.
Philip would have less divided time.
I good with all of that, as long as I get the answer. You see, this is one thing people have a problem with, They like to say thing and they don't like to hear thing in response. The truth of the matter is, you're not dividing the time equally, but I will take my hit because I accustomed with this small fry.
You
I
counting?
take in that, but I had to keep a count in everything.
No, but you counting
In
how much
everything.
But he
in
had the
Trinidad.
most time.
I don't know what you making noise
He has
about,
the
but
most
that-
time out of
It
all
only
numbers.
sounds like that because I bring
I
the
have
most.
the minutes here,
I knew you would have the minutes.
It's commentary.
This is Point of View with David Mohammed on Power 102.
Over the last few days, there has been a lot of concern over one, a voice note, then a second voice note, and a third voice note that featured multiple racial slurs and references to First of all, I want to make reference to a May 30th, 2005 Guardian newspaper report, which was a UNC press release for Indian Arrival Day, which said, quote, East Indians must band together and save this land from raiders, kidnappers, and criminals. There is now a growing suspicion that the ruling PNM has targeted the leaders in the East Indian community for humiliation. Now, what is loaded in that is that on one side you have the Indian community, but on the other side you have raiders, kidnappers, and criminals. And the subtle implication is that, well, maybe the PNM supporters, who are largely Afro-based, are the raiders, bandits, criminals, kidnappers, etc. Then you see a consistent pattern of a number of statements, particularly around that politically charged period, where you had UNC Senator Harry Mungle Singh, who in the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, which is the highest court of the land, suggesting that as a solution to crime, that black women in Laventille should have abortions. That was in 2007. He was subsequently fired by Jack Warner, who was chairman of the party. But what would embolden someone to say something like that in the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago? You have also these attitudes which were displayed, such as from WIN TV journalist Darrell Hiralal, who was fired on February 24, 2013 for publicly expressing extreme racist views against African people on a Facebook profile post where he said that the Africans in Ceylon, whom after having 2 of their residents killed by vehicular manslaughter, that there should be some kind of military action against them. Just like in November 2017, a very popular radio talk show host who does a nighttime who was interviewed by Andy Johnson a couple of weeks ago, and I was wondering if it was the same Jaishima Leela Singh who in 2013 put a post in a private UNC group on Facebook saying, in reference to a protest that was being hosted at Port of Spain City Hall, calling on supporters of the UNC party to come out and show their support. He said, this is Jaishima Leela Singh, who was a board member of the Chaguaramas Development Authority. He said we should get the quote-unquote niggers to come to the protest because they are gullible and pushy, and they will enhance the image of the People's Partnership government. Now, when you consider the cumulative effect of all of those racist sentiments and attitudes, and you couple that with illiteracy and ignorance, you get the most uninformed voter who is unable to process and analyze, weigh, evaluate, judge, and measure the content and quality of political ideas and manifestos, and then we end up just voting on race and ethnicity and end up in the same consistent, continuous cesspool cycle of politicians and political leadership that we have had for almost the last 55 years or so. That is my point of view, but God is the best knower.
You pay for that. You pay for that. They buy that time. I just want to know. I would buy some of that time to come and say things like that too. We're giving attention to nonsense. Those things not trending. Communications is what I do. Gary Griffith is still the most popular government minister in history. I know what I do when it comes to communication. Your talk just now about why the People's Partnership, despite all they do fail, Rodney Charles and Vasant Bharat spinning wheels on Independence Square, the bullshit of their election campaign is why they lost. That is why they lost. This not trending on nothing. Nobody cares about this race talk. Nobody cares.
I disagree with you on that.
Where are the numbers? I could give you numbers.
I disagree with you on that. People are upset over it. And
The racists.
And justified.
The rest of Trinidad and Tobago couldn't care. Let the racists talk. Carolyn, you have to have numbers.
You don't care about it.
No, but social media tells you what is trending. Nalini went nowhere. Sat going nowhere. Nobody cares.
Really?
Ignore that.
Yes,
They have bigger issues.
And not because
This is what leadership is about. Understanding that not to give attention to that.
No. Leadership is about getting it right.
You're going to solve Nalini and Sat?
And that is wrong what went on there, and we need to correct it.
How do you correct
right? We have
that?
to stand up and correct it.
How do you correct that when he forgot to include Fitzgerald Hines say, find a stake with a balize and drive it into the heart of the Indian vampires? You going and go and fix all of that? How? Leave them to die off. That whole madness going.
If you continue that,
Caroline, I would never debate that with you all. You all can have that part of the fight. I want a better Trinidad and Tobago. I want politicians who understand the needs of the people. Listen, you could have your opinion. You know, I hear somebody tell me once, a big politician tell me, the gazelles drink with the gazelles and the zebras drink with the zebras. Yeah, no problem with that. What is the name of the organization that you represent? See? If they had a white agenda in Trinidad and Tobago, they would kill Timothy. They would, I understand, but I'm saying to you, you would lynch Timothy if he formed a white agenda. Yes or no?
No. That is.
I am beyond.
We have had a pattern of slavery and colonialism in this country where laws have.
Brother, you have had financial and social control of this country with a black party. How come we still talking slavery?
Okay, because laws were, there are people who own wealth today that they acquired through laws that were implemented.
In the 80s, the Syrians had no money. Where the Syrians wealth come from all of a sudden?
There were never, listen, patterns of land distribution in this country were targeted against Africans by law. By law, Africans didn't own land.
I would love that debate on air with you. Anytime you're ready.
Andy, good luck.
Just before we get back to the program, let's let you know that the Moko Methodist Church presents Cameron at 8:05, happening on Saturday, April 20th. It's going to be at City Hall, North Street in Port of Spain. It starts at 5 p.m. Tickets are $125. Heaven and Need a Hug. 5, a life-changing experience. 5 p.m. April 20th at the City Hall in Port of Spain, presented by the Mova.
One of the sessions this morning, Rhoda Bard, who was the co-host of the Power Breakfast Show, in that session with the guests, she zeroed in on what she considered to be the real issue. If we could just go back to her to kind of reset the discussion as to where we want to go, why we're talking about campaign finance reform. It's been discussed around the table, but just to come back on zero in on that, the basis of people funding and financing political parties because they expect returns on their investment, and those returns come from the sharing up of, the divvying up of contracts.
Very honestly, it's a business. You contribute to a campaign, you get your party into government. When the party gets into government, that gives you access to the treasury in particular ways, and it puts money back into the pockets of the financiers, and I dare say probably back into the pockets of the politicians themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of the discussion we have not yet gotten to. How do we make it so that giving those people that have financed a campaign access to the treasury stops happening?
Yeah.
That's what has to be discussed here. Because as far as I'm concerned, if Richard own a business and he wants to come up with money in my pocket, I'm a Richard business.
Yeah.
Right? And he's free to come up with money into my pocket. But there must be a way to safeguard the treasury from Richard then being able to have access to it through contracts and tenders.
Well, I think
What is the evidence, Rishi Maharaj? You referred to it, all of you referred to it. What is the evidence of the fact that that is reality? What contracts could we point to say that is the result of some entity having financed a campaign?
I raise my hand.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Alexander could
Speaker, I raise my hand.
different things, but I mean, anecdotally, the assumption and the perception is that many of the people who finance these political parties, especially two major political parties within the island, that at the end of the day, it is a business. And it's about investment and return on investment. And the allegation has always been, although there's nothing that we can say to put down and say, well, you contributed, because there's nothing that we can actually say that business A financed party X, and because we know he financed $50,000, that he got back contracts worth 10 times more than that. There's nothing evidential that I have seen that we can say that points it, but the assumption has always been that people go into it from a business point of view, because at the end of the day, when you finance political party, you know, at the end of the day, whoever gets the thrones of power controls a budget of about what, $45 billion annually is the budget of Trinidad and Tobago. Out of that contract being awarded to that, you can use that to buffer up yourself and get a return on investment close to 300%. So I mean, the assumption has always been that, and we've always seen allegations made that when certain people get contract, oh, that's a major financial political party X or major financial political party Y. But from an evidential point of view, we have the lawyers who can argue that there's nothing in the books that can actually demonstrate and show that you finance this party, and because of that you were able to get X amount. Obviously, there are evidence that other people may be able to provide better than I can.
I like that you look
I
at
would just ask, as you let me
without pointing to anybody, which Philip wants to do.
Definitely.
Nobody.
Without prejudice, of course.
No, I think we don't.
Cancel and rebuke that.
Nobody, no business puts out 300 million without an expectation of return. That alone by itself indicates that there must be something beyond my, you look really nice, Andy, so here is 100 million.
No,
That's not what's happening.
or
I'm
you-
putting out my 100
or you
million,
stand
my
for something
200
that
million.
we believe
But you
is-
can't
is-
prove that I gave you that money.
I think you're standing a little too strong. No, and frankly, it is ridiculous if we spend 300 million on
Well,
this
that's
to
the-
begin with.
That's
If-
the point.
That's
Yeah.
If you
It's
look
a
in
cumulative
Jamaica,
amount, yeah.
if in Jamaica, they've capped it at about 32 million TT dollars, right? That's what they have what 63 members in the House of Representatives,
Yes.
I think, versus 41. They have 3 million persons versus 1.5. So even if you took their number, which was I think 2016 they passed that legislation, as push it up to 40 million. You know what? Say 1 million per constituency. That's a good way to arrive at what you should spend. 41 million. Anything above that, the 260 million above that indicates somebody is looking for return.
Yeah. And it doesn't.
And that alone, to me, and this is not unique to Trinidad.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, because it hasn't obviated, removed the allegations of corruption in Jamaica, because when you listen to Buju Banton and
So we need to do more than simply have party financing. So there are a number of things you have to do. There's no one magic pill. Obviously, you need procurement legislation that is introduced as well.
yeah.
You see, it's part of becoming.
Let me go first. Go before. I'm coming around the table in this,
Yes,
in this order.
thank you. Okay, good. Because Timothy is on a good road, but he's running off of it. You're not supposed to worry about quantums. What you need is a system that is equal to everybody. Enjoy your reference, right? If Guardian Media allows Faris, Rowley, Fitzgerald Hines, Colm every morning on a morning show and does not allow equal time to the Progressive Empowerment Party and the other parties, that is financing. That is using political power. The $300 million you're talking about here, 275 million being spent in media houses. The media is the greatest purveyor.
But all of
So you're
that
saying
to
that comes
provide
with-
for in legislation.
But you think that comes with
Timothy, I just
financing?
I wanna be able to put all these pieces on the table, because people pretend. Because Rishi just said that there will come a time when You're not supposed to be signing leases for buildings that the other party have to deal with, whether to break the lease or honor it. There must come a time within the life of a political party where that you are the government, but there is a
with the other party to deal with. People don't be in
whoever
government
comes
expecting that
whoever
they will
comes
lose.
into
So what you're
government.
doing,
No, but
you're
whoever
doing that on the basis of hoping to
yes,
win.
but you have to also remember that there is no guarantee that the deals you make, you are the one that's going to live with it. There's no guarantee. Because between now and then, there is an election and there's a chance that you could lose.
So you're saying up to a certain point, governments shouldn't get into making new deals, shouldn't get into signing new contracts, shouldn't get into launching.
When the
projects.
United States economy collapsed, I give you an analogy to prove the point. When the United States economy collapsed during the Freddie Mac housing bubble burst,
2009,
2008, when John McCain pulled out to say that he's going back to deal with that issue, that was politicizing a governmental issue. It should have never become his to determine. He was on a campaign for president, and if you were going, and that the point is, you cannot use incumbency to enter into any agreements, deal with any matters publicly to get the same exposure we're talking about that is the currency of a campaign. Media, we need an equal time
but
law.
I also believe that once a period of campaigning is determined, those things come into effect. But generally, so that people in office will seek to get as much mileage up to a point, but because that is what the society sort of wants to hear.
You're not wrong. But all I'm saying is the media has a role to play, and I'm saying this to Timothy because Timothy represents all of them, and the media has a role to play, and the media role must be when Kijan Haynes interviewed Stuart Young this week. It is because the Progressive Empowerment Party has forced into the national conversation for the past 2 years secure the borders, and when Stuart Young was allowed to tell Kijan Haynes on that morning show that it is impossible to secure the borders, TV6 had an obligation to seek a response from me.
Okay. Well, some do it differently from others. Let's just say that.
I think we're confusing the issues. I don't think what Philip is suggesting is practical. A government has to operate, and the government in office has to operate up until the day before they leave
election.
office. Okay, and they have a duty to continue to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are serviced, regardless whether you're running for the election or not. Okay? My point, I think what Rishi is raising is a different issue. Is what happens is that when we get into campaign, we start using the state resources as part of our campaign. So the point is, as he was raising with India, you cannot use the state resources to promote yourself in a political campaign. So therefore now you block off all these media issues. You block off a lot of it will be with the media as we're talking about, and announcements that are taking place using state resources and are launching projects that are politically minded. Not necessarily the projects that are involved or that you have to, because if you delay it could cost the state. So let's be very careful. So sometimes when we're suggesting things, we have to be very, very practical about what we are doing. So the bottom line I'm saying is that I think what is happening here is we are not separating out governance from the political party. And we are allowing that to continue to model the two. And when it should not be, good governance requires that we separate out the interests of the political party from government.
All right, was it good governance, you think, when in his address to the nation, I think in the second part of it, the Prime Minister read out this list of contracts that were signed just days before the election. Was that good?
Exactly. That is
and that was something wrong?
That was wrong. You're using media paid for by the state, because an address to the nation is costly, and you're using it to promote yourself for the next
But Carol, you just
election.
contradict yourself.
No, what I'm saying is, no. What I'm saying is there are jobs, you're saying don't sign any contract.
No, I'm saying operation versus investment. You just contradict yourself.
But you have
if you are announcing investment.
Wait a second. What I was trying to get at is that in that address, you say something was wrong with the address itself.
The address was being used as a political campaign.
Right,
it was
which
politicking. And it is there are clear laws on it now.
Yeah.
I mean, case law.
Yeah.
Because we could go back and look at the Indira Gandhi situation.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to get at is where he said in his address that he read out the things that were listed as sins of the last administration. He was talking about contracts that were signed in the week
Exactly.
before
So
the
what
election.
is the purpose of saying all of that? How does that help the operations? And how does it...
He's suggesting that I was wrong and it should not have happened, that contracts were
So
signed.
you're using the opportunity to condemn another political party. Isn't that political
the
campaigning?
government, well.
So you can define them, what they are. That's what I'm saying. It's in the legislation, and it's not necessarily legislation, but in regulations. You can develop those rules of conduct. And it has to be how you're encouraging the right type of conduct. And that's the point I'm trying to make. We can't divorce it. When you come to campaign financing, it's what behavior are we trying to encourage? And we must remember that as well, because I want to come back to the point Timothy is making about the monies that are coming into political parties as well. You have limits, and you could set those limits for what we call the interested money. But those limits as well, you can't, say that it's all wrong money. Because it is money that is coming in sometimes to say, look, listen, I want to see a healthy democracy. I want to see more political parties come forward. I want to see more of your ideology. I am hoping that if we fund you, you could change the conversation. I remember somebody telling me that if I give you this money, it's because I want you to help change the conversation of this country into one that is healthy and that can encourage a healthy debate on issues and engage citizens. This is one of the things that you have to look at.
And you'd say that is, to some extent, why people supported the COP in its inception, because they wanted to see that.
What I want to see is a national campaign fund, quite frankly, so that if a corporate wants to give money to foster democracy, it goes all into that fund. The truth is, when you start to blur the line, when you say, well, because everybody's going to say, I'm doing it to support democracy. So you need to, frankly, if you're going to have a law that creates offenses, you need to have black and white, hard-drawn lines that allow it. And I prefer the methodology that allows for...
But Timothy, the issue you're raising is that you have to have transparency in governance as well. If you don't have that scrutiny in governance and making sure there's value for money, where you could link it back, then how are you doing it? And that's what the job of an agency will come in.
In Jamaica, what they did was that they had... If 2 years before you give your contribution above a certain limit, you had a contract with the government, you have to identify that. That's all it's saying. And if 2 years after you make your contribution, you have a contract with the government, you have to identify that. And all that gets listed. And therefore, if you were making some investigation later on, then you could, about X, a contract to X, then you could go, whether it was to the EBC, I agree it could be a different body, then you could go and ask for the information so you could see the underlying reality of what happened.
And that public agency is supposed to be able to monitor at all points in time political parties, the funding you got, and then when they check and they see, well, this particular corporation got that contract, they can investigate it.
I feel like a witness to a nice Congress of the People debate. But if I could have just answered one of the things he just said,
let me just invite
please.
people to begin the call.
But could I just answer one thing before I invite the calls?
I'm just going to announce that. We want to begin to open up the discussion for the members and the people who are listening at 222-8255 and 612-8255.
Because I'm listening to a lot of contradictions coming out of the same mouths. And what Timothy wants is more democracy, but he's limiting the democracy by saying let all of us spend from a collective pool. If you limit the amount that a person could spend, they could give you $150 million. You could only spend $50,000. What's the point of the balance? There's no point to it. They won't give you and you can't use it. So there's no point. I'm saying keep it simple. Carolyn C. Prasad Bechan seems to be stuck on content. Her party brought some nonsense to the country called a political code of ethics in 2000. What was the date of that when they all went and signed that nonsense? And it was her party that broke it the same evening. There is nothing you could do to marshal human behavior at this level. Please let me finish because you all had your time. You can't marshal human behavior at this level. I listened to this guy speak when he was doing his thing when we were off air.
David Muhammad.
We're trying to control human behavior by legislation. That is the function of leadership. That is the purpose of government. To talk about will become self-evident and easily guided. Our campaign finance legislation that we want to talk about, you put a cap. Everything that passes in that 6 weeks that could be quantified as currency for exposure put a cap and put a value and make the candidate responsible, the consequence must be disqualification. So that if you break the rules, it ain't no court. Your candidacy is null and
void. If you were
void.
asked to subscribe to clauses for this legislation, ideas for this legislation, that's what you would put for campaign.
Absolutely.
All right. Good afternoon. I think we have a call on the line. Good afternoon.
And one party gets evicted from another building. So if you that is unbalanced, it is people
He started talking
feeding these people. And another thing is, I'm taking too long, but Dr. Rowley, you approach the Sanders group before he became Prime Minister. So if he could approach Sanders group before he became Prime Minister and say he will be Prime Minister and he will give them a chance to come in and he will take government money and buy land and then put a building and give them to manage. So this is a kind of dishonest act. The political parties have to be more dishonest in their ways and it must have checks and balances.
You have to be more honest.
No, that Freudian slip was for a purpose. That's a purpose.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your lady name there?
Karen Sipasad Dechan.
Ms. Mason, listen to you and you're correct in many things that you said because I support 100%. Particularly
Thank you.
when you make reference to the separation and we not be able to separate government from party. And that's one of our biggest issues in this country. We go into government with a party mentality. So there's no Trinidad and Tobago and governance of Trinidad and Tobago. PNM in government, IT or PNM. When in government, same thing. And when it comes to campaign financing, I always ask the question, who you finance, the government or party? So therefore, who should pay you back, the government or the party? If you finance my party, this is the PNM or the UNC. When I go into government, I represent the whole of San Diego. I don't represent a party, I represent the whole of San Diego. So therefore, if you have to get anything back, it's from the party, not from the government. You can go into the treasury, but you didn't finance the government. And these are the issues that we have in this country here. We don't have a government or a San Diego mentality. We have a party mentality.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for that comment.
Circles,
Thank you very
running
much.
circles
The
there.
question that I would
agree,
like
I
to
would
ask
agree,
him if he supported your point of view because he's all fine because he supported the COP or
No,
because-
he's saying that he supports the view that if we separate out the governance
Yeah.
from the party, we will get the financing part of it. That's what he was going at. Because the bottom line, and that's I think the point I was making then, which he was picking up, is that you can't do it. It's not isolated. Financing is not isolated
Give
from
our
governance.
fans the number to call in
All
so
right.
they could add to this
Good afternoon.
conversation
I
too.
don't know the guy.
Yes, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Concerning party financing,
Yes.
just addressing the issue with Balize House, for instance. You know, when the Prime Minister launched the raffle back in June 2018, he made it clear that his party generosity, participation of the membership, the supporters, the wider business community is what will fund this building. Now, we still have to get proof of what went on with the raffle and how many tickets were sold. Because I have a little information that shows that there wasn't many tickets. And they claim that the building is supposed to be between $12.5 to $25 million. Each raffle ticket sold for $100. So that is in excess of
25,000 tickets.
125,000 to 250,000 raffle tickets. Now they made mention that they said this was their major fundraiser. They made mention of other instances where they hold a little boat cruise and all that, and you know we gathering money over the years. We hear Minister Lehan talk recently about buy a brick, everybody will contribute so it will be a part. But at the end of the day, simple. Who provided the 10 vehicles? Honda, BMW, owned by Ansar Motors. Understand what I'm saying? So that is a conflict of interest already. It comes like they have donated the vehicles and that amount of money.
He's absolutely correct.
And therefore they look for a return on that
He's
investment. That's what you're saying?
absolutely correct. Spot on.
Before you
Go ahead.
Look, in answer to question in the parliament last week, This is official documentation, written answer on the order paper for the Senate, 11th of April 2019. And in reference to the questions that you asked, they were
that truck
Yeah.
plus the man lift is $300,000. The government paid $694,000 for 22 of them each, and that means when we talk about where's the quid pro quo and the kickback, Timothy Hamilton is an esteemed attorney. So you could ask him if this makes any sense at all. We pay hundreds of millions of dollars for justice on time to move prisoners throughout this country. $10 million would bill a court outside a court outside each jail. So the only thing that you have to move is the magistrate. The reality on the ground is what takes place in government. Government come, government go. Institutional finances like Sabgan, Aboud, and these people, they don't have to declare nothing. They're benefiting regardless of which political party is in office, and you need to be in a position. Procurement is inextricably tied to this.
So the procurement is very important. I couldn't begin to pronounce upon the numbers like Philip. And therefore, but it is an important, of course, you do have a campaign period, and that's when these things kick in. Democracy, and we see that as a vehicle through which we attain it, then they deserve to be financed. I mean, I know people don't like to give money to politicians, but if you're going to run a political party, you need, I think, a policy consultant, and I think we're suffering from not having that, but you need secretarial help. You should have a CEO.
Calls, yeah.
You need computers. You need office space. How can we hope that we can move to, the country can move to a new level if our political parties are really still left scrunting? But what we need is legislation that makes sure that ultimately you want a level playing field. That's what you want to achieve.
And governments have to procure goods and services to meet the needs of the people.
Obviously government needs to, obviously, I mean, that goes back then the process.
Yeah.
Exactly what was the process that went through in terms of the procurement. That's what the new procurement legislation is supposed to address, the whole idea of value for money, the whole idea of ministries updating exactly what the procurement practices are going to be year beforehand, so you plan beforehand what you're going to procure, and you have the proper paperwork and things in place, open
one I mentioned that you need to therefore require people who have contracts with the government but also contribute, that they have to record if their contribution is above a certain threshold. They have to record and report to the EBC, to whatever authority you want, that they have a contract, whether it was two years before, 2 years after. That allows you to put some meat on what you really want to do. And there are other provisions that you could introduce. Philip thinks that the code of ethical conduct or political conduct is nebulous and can't be helped. The truth is, I could make a provision, as they have in Jamaica, unless I get a certificate from the director involved, as the director in control of elections, that I have conformed to the code, then I'm going to get zero. All right? Yeah. There are consequences for that, and that's the only thing people hear and understand. Yes, if they get disqualified. Yes, if they get fined $3 million. Yes, if they get thrown in jail for $12 million. But of course, at the end of the day, enforcement is what you have to have. Without enforcement, and that's where we fall down in Trinidad and Tobago hugely. All your laws you could have, if you don't enforce them, they amount to zero.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for your
Gentlemen.
Always nice, Timothy.
We will take a break. We'll be back in a moment, sir.
And I find you doing that regular, allowing people to put some weighted statements and then leave it.
Keeps the audience waiting.
I don't know this, forget fast. I agree with half of what he just said and disagree completely with the other half. I disagree completely with putting more rules on the democracy. If I had the power to do it, I would remove that $5,000 deposit. Let 100 people contest each seat. Open up the democracy. Yes, you will have a jackass farm, but you will also get good, decent people, and it will be determined by the voters.
Nobody going in politics because there's so much mud you have to take.
No, but real activists that are disconnected from campaign financing, they can't go in because of the first thing is that $5,000. Remove that. Let the people who working on the ground be able to go door to door. That will start to make a difference. We've limited it to two parties. The People's Partnership brought this mad runoff to further limit it. We need to open it up to more competition, more. His proportional representation is an That's how the Shouter Baptists end up supporting Pandy. Proportional representation is important. All of these things.
What do you mean that she had to give him everything?
The PNM government outlawed the Shouter Baptists. She went to Pandy to get that removed. The deal they made was to support the UNC.
PNM government, that was happening before the PNM was in office, was in existence. The law is 1917. Prohibition.
The prohibition was removed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But they gave them the holiday.
No, but it is Pandy's government that removed it. The PNM had the opportunity to remove it and didn't. It is Pandy government that did. And they got that in exchange for political support. They shouldn't have to do that in a climate of proportional representation.
Prohibition was removed in 1951.
Not at all. Not at all.
Shouter Baptist prohibition.
All of the information that I have on that, I will send to you and you tell me what you see. Because at the end of the conversation, that is why they supported the UNC. To get
plenty of people today.
That's the point.
When you go to a UNC convention.
I remember when he went to in 95, my dad was because he was involved at that time. Yeah, that the party was so afraid that the army would revolt against him if during election 95, that they wanted to put systems in place to avoid if that happened.
But you forget we had ended up with the army camped in Cocorita by Grand Bazaar, by Nestle, for Pandey's first